Okay, thank you, Shirane-san, and thank you very much for opportunity to share our family and our experience, my experience today. Uh, Today's subject is the 80th anniversary of Executive Order 9066, which was signed February 19, 1942. And together with uh, aftermath of what happened after Executive 9066, especially myself, because I was just born in the camp, but 4 months afterwards, uh, we went back to Hiroshima. So I had spent 10 years in Hiroshima, and we had a hard time coming back to this country, but we did come back and lived in South Central LA for 10 years, from 1956 to 1968 February. And I like to get into the subject of my Vietnam War experience and coming back with PTSD and disabled because of Agent Orange. And I'll get into how I was able to realize my American dream uh, by starting my own real estate because I could not hold a job. PTSD was so severe that whatever job that I had, I was not able to hold. And then afterwards, I was in the right place at the right time, and I was able to handle the Japanese market in the 1970s and 80s. And that's when I was able to dream the American dream. And during this time, I've been, myself and my wife, been challenging the Executive Order 9066, which I'll get into. But so, Shirane-san, could you start with the first picture? Okay. Okay, this is Turtle Lake Segregation Center. This is where my life started. And I was born here on October 20th, 1944. Our family was here 2 years. Actually, our family went to Santa Anita Racetrack Assembly Center for 6 months. And later, first camp they moved to was Lower Arkansas. And then finally to this Turtle Lake. And this camp, somebody asked me, well, you had guard and you have machine gun pointed at you inside this barbed wire. And the question was that live ammunition ever used? And I was told in May of 1944 that the guard used that to shoot young Japanese men who was supposed to go work outside. And he was a little late and he was chasing the truck that was supposed to pick him up. He got shot and killed. And the guard was exonerated. But anyway, that has some, history. And since I was not, didn't experience this camp, I did go back to the pilgrim that we had back about 11 years ago. They have pilgrim at Turtle Lake Segregation Center every 2 years. Okay, Shirano-san, could you get the next? Yes. Now we are talking about Executive Order 9066. These are some of the instructions that they're given to the Japanese American and Japanese national of Japanese ancestry. 120,000 Japanese people of Japanese descent were imprisoned in 10 different camps. We were given 10 days notice with one carry-on suitcase. And later on, I'll get into this. This was purely based on racial prejudice. And my family, they lost everything, including dignity. And this has happened in the American soil, not in Nazi Germany, not in North Korea, in America, where German Americans or the Italian Americans were not in prison. Next, please. This is Aiko Yoshida, the activist who discovered the truth about World War II internment camp. In 1978, she uncovered the manipulated record, which interned 120,000 Japanese Americans and in the West Coast, even though we were not threat to the security of the United States. Let me read some of the excerpts from her. I was fortunate enough to speak to her 3 months before she passed away because my friend knew her, who lived in Gardena, California, and she lived in Torrance. And we had lunch together, and she was very frail because she was pretty ill at that time too, but she had lunch with us. Well, she died at age 93. She was a singular hero in documenting the ugly truth about racism that was in the heart of the incarceration. I'm reading some of the excerpts. One of the most significant documents she found was the original final report, General DeWitt, which was a key in providing that the government has submitted a false and manipulated record to the Supreme Court in order to justify its actions. When officials in what was called then the War Department discovered DeWitt's original report contradicted the government's position, they had DeWitt revise his report. The department ordered a copy of it destroyed, and the revision version was given to Supreme Court. And this is what she uncovered in 1978. When she was in Washington, D.C., with her husband. It was her third marriage, but she was married to an American officer, and she was able to get into some of the classified information. And so the Executive Order 9066 was not justified by military necessity. The broad historical causes which shaped these decisions were race prejudice, war hysteria, and failure of political leadership. After the September 11, 2001 attack, today immigrants are again being branded as danger to this country. Minority communities continue to experience discrimination, hostility, and hate. The Supreme Court in travel ban case recently has deferred to the president's action carried out in the name of national security, even in the face of evidence that they were motivated by prejudice. So there were three other gentlemen, young men, who were responsible for Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which I'll get into very shortly, was one of the apology letter that I received in October 1st of 1993. The Civil Liberties Act of 1988 was signed by President Reagan. And a lot of people ask me, oh, could you go to the next page there? Okay. This is the apology letter that I received sometime in October of 1993. And this took 5 years because this was sent to us together with $20,000 monetary compensation. And that's why it took 5 years to send this out to the surviving internees. People who have passed away, like my parents, did not witness this letter. This is very important. I think this is like today's topic. And let me just read this. I'm sure you can read it together with me. Over 50 years ago, the United States government unjustly in turn evacuated or relocated you and many other Japanese Americans. Today, on behalf of your fellow Americans, I offer sincere apology to you for the actions unfairly denied the Japanese Americans and families fundamental liberties during the World War II. In passing the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, we acknowledge the wrongs of the past and offer redress to those who endure such grave injustice. In retrospect, we understand that the nation's action was rooted deeply in racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and lack of political leadership. We must learn from the past and dedicate ourselves as a nation to renewing the spirit of equality and a love of freedom. Together, we can guarantee a future for liberty and justice for all. And you and your family have my best wishes for the future. Bill Clinton. It took another 40 years for the United States Supreme Court to rule Executive Order 9066 unconstitutional. Overall, it took 75 years since the Executive Order 9066 was passed for the Supreme Court to rule this unconstitutional. Only regret I have is that my parents, who had suffered so much, were not able to witness this. And we did receive $20,000 monetary compensation. I still remember the time we got this letter and $20,000. My wife just took that $20,000 away and put it in my son's savings. In 1998, 5 years later, we were able to pay one semester at Georgetown University, $20,000. So anyway, monetary compensation was appreciated, but really this has done anything to really compensate anybody who lost their life, 4 years of their lives in prison. And this was all due to racial prejudice. Okay, next page, please. Now, I'd like to talk about Fred Korematsu, Minoru Yasui, Gordon Hirabayashi. These were three men who defied Executive Order 9066. Instead, they took the prison and served prison terms. And they took this all the way to Supreme Court, but they lost. Unfortunately, these three men, they were never able to witness the Supreme Court on March 30th, 2018. Very unfortunate. But as I mentioned earlier, that something that my wife and I have been doing is challenge the Executive Order 9066. This was one of the things that we did last year, January 16. We were able to pass Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and Constitution in Borough Fort Lee. This is where I spent most of my time, 50 years since I came back from Vietnam. And I'm very familiar with people in Fort Lee and also the mayor and council. It took them just overnight to pass this. In the city of New York, 5 years later, I also testified in front of the council, but that took 2 years to have it approved. But next year, we'll be already celebrating the 5th year of Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and Constitution in the city of New York. Currently, I'm working in the state of New Jersey. This is where I have lived here 50 years. Last year, October, I testified at the Senate Judiciary Committee. They had passed the Senate Resolution 95 unanimously. And this year, on January 26th, the rest of the state senate had passed this proclamation. And this year, January 23rd, the assemblyman named, what is his name? From New Jersey, and also Borelli from Trenton had co-sponsored this. And we are still waiting that the passage from the assembly. It did pass the Judiciary Committee of Assembly this year on January 23rd. And hopefully this will pass. And our ultimate goal is to go to Washington, D.C. Hopefully, since the executive order 9066 was passed an executive order, maybe perhaps, I don't know, maybe I'm just dreaming, President Biden will sign the executive order declaring the day February 19th, 1942, the date when the executive order 9066 was passed, to recognize this particular day in the United States, and also provide some education so that no other Americans, such as we have experienced, will suffer the same fate we had faced. Okay, next page, please, Shirane-san. There was another picture before that. No? There's a picture of my father when I was little in Hiroshima. No?
Sorry,
okay.
yeah, that wasn't there. Sorry about that.
It wasn't there? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, let me go over some of the historical background of our family. He has history from 1911 all the way to today. My father came in 1921, right after the 3-year Spanish flu pandemic. He was 13 at the time to rejoin his parents in Florence, Sacramento, California. Because of the Spanish flu, throughout worldwide, the economy was not doing good, including United States. So at age 14, he had to carry a blanket to become a migrant farmer, going from one farm to another, picking strawberry at age 14. But he did finish 8th grade education in Florence, California. They had elementary school, 1st to 8th. But that particular elementary school, and you could probably check the history, was segregated, just like the blacks were segregated in the South. Because due to the Japanese Exclusion Act, Japanese were not able to own real estate. Even their Caucasian counterparts were able to. We're not allowed to marry international marriage. My father had to come back to Japan to marry my mother on an arranged marriage. And of course, like the schools were segregated. So he went through a lot. Okay, next page, please. Yes. 17 years after, he being a migrant farmer, he learned how to drive. He had street smart. He tried really hard. He moved to Los Angeles. And he was able to start this produce together with Mr. Oka, having 26 men working for him. But 4 years later, when President Roosevelt passed the Executive Order 9066, he had lost everything. When he went into the camp, he had nothing. And when we went back to Japan, which I'll get into Hiroshima story, we had nothing. And we spent 10 years, and after we came back to the United States, we lived in South Central LA, he had nothing. He suffered so much, but one thing he had, he never lost the focus, bringing us back to America, because he knew there's an opportunity in this country. And this we did. We were able to dream our American dream, which I will get into this later on my topic. Anyway, this was part of our history. And I'm very proud to talk about my father because he really tried hard. In our generation, we done well because of him and his hard work. Next page, please. Jonathan, can you flip to the next one? Okay. This is Santa Anita Racetrack. This was the assembly center. They had 15 of these assembly center when the executive order 9066 was passed. In May of 1942, our family had moved to Santa Anita Racetrack because they had lived in East LA. And this is where they had spent next 6 months, while 10 internment camps were built in the remote areas of the United States, which took about 6 months. And I used to remember my sister saying that, or during the summertime, because they went in May, like June, July, August, she said the stench in the stable was unbearable. They had to live here for 6 months. Would you go to the next page? This camp is called Lower in Arkansas. This is our family. There's one kid there that doesn't belong there, but she was one of my sister's good friends. But I was not quite born here. But this is Lower California, Lower Arkansas. And from Santa Anita Racetrack, they were taken by the train with the shades down so the American public will not see them. It took several days to get there. But right after this camp, they were moved to Turtle Lake segregation camp. This is when the US government had the loyalty question, specifically question 27 and 28. People who answered no to these questions will move to Turtle Lake segregation camp, the most heavily guarded. They call this unloyal Americans. But let me go over what 27 and 28 said. 27 said, would you faithfully serve in this country to defend this country? And my parents said, no, absolutely not. I lost everything what I worked for, and our $4 is locked inside the prison. How in the world am I going to volunteer and serve this country? He answered, no. Now, another question, 28 said, would you disavow Emperor of Japan? At that time, our grandparents, my father's side and my mother's side, were living in Hiroshima, Japan. And he would never be able to see them if he would disavow Emperor of Japan. So they both answered no. By the way, people who had to answer this loyalty question, they had to be 17 years or older. Okay, next page, please. Now, this is a go for broke Japanese soldier during the World War II, and they had become most decorated unit in entire history of the United States military. This was unveiled June 3rd of this year to dedicate them for their service. I'm very proud of them. This young man had answered yes. They had no place to go but America, and they want to prove their loyalty. And some, I'm sure, they want to go outside for adventure. They didn't want to be locked up. But because of these records, this past history of these men, 442nd Regimental Troops. When I went to Vietnam War, the life for me was a lot easier than when they had it during World War II. Okay, next please. Now, I finally come into the picture. This is a picture took when I was born, October 20, 1945. I'm a little bit older there. You see that panda bear. That panda bear went all the way to Hiroshima. When I first looked at this panda bear, it's so white. I couldn't believe it. Because first time I saw this panda bear, I remember being dark gray because nobody washed it. Next to this was my passport picture when we went back to Hiroshima. You could see 6 months later, my hair had grown quite a bit. The next page. This is the last picture we took at the Turtle Lake segregation camp. One of my sisters was not in the picture, so I thought, well, maybe I'll put her. The smaller one was my sister Margie. Now, we went back to Japan because my grandparents were victims of atomic bomb. Both my parents, my father, my mother's side lived in Hiroshima, Japan at that time. My mother's side had lived only 2 miles from epicenter of atomic bomb. It was close to Hiroshima train station. My father's grandparents lived about 7 miles from epicenter. That's where we had lived from January of 1946 to May of 1956. And one of the other reasons is that all my sisters, when they went to Turtle Lake, they were taught Japanese language instead of English. They were taught the Japanese culture. And they even sang the Japanese national songs. And they wanted to go back. They had no idea what atomic bomb did to the people. But we did go back voluntarily. But my mother, who is American citizen, had to denounce her citizenship and was never allowed to come back. Of course, that was at the time. And my father was born in Hiroshima, so he couldn't come back. But 5 of us, we had American citizens. We retained it, but we couldn't do anything with our parents. And in 1952, when my sister Mary turned 21, we found a loophole whereby she could recall the parents to United States. So she worked very hard. My second sister came in 1953. She worked hard and finally were able to recall my father in 1954. Following year, my sister Margie, the third oldest sister, came. And ultimately in 1956, my mother, myself, and my other sister came back. It took 4 years. When we met in San Francisco, this was one of my happiest moments to see each other again. Well, anyway, this was the last picture that we took in the camp. Okay, next, please. This is the USS Gordon. This military ship was used during the World War II to transport the American troops. It carried about 5,000. There were 4,000 of us that went back to Japan from Turtle Lake. There were, let me just give you some statistics to give you some idea who went back. There were 1,116 where we had to renounce their citizenship, like my mother, and 1,523 aliens, like my father, and 1,718 minors, like us, went back to Japan. And a lot of the people who went back to Japan had never come back because of the bad treatment that they had received. Like my 2 uncles, my cousin was born in the same place I was 2 months later, but they never had come back. But anyway, this is the transport ship that went back from Portland, Oregon, all the way to Yokosuka in Japan. It took about 3 weeks. We had left Turtle Lake segregation camp, and then went to Portland, Oregon, and to Yokosuka, which took 3 weeks. And when we arrived at Yokosuka, we were transported by bus to Yokohama, and they gave us a chartered train that took all the way back to Hiroshima. And I like to share one of the stories that my sister, Margie, told me about. And during that time, 1946, January, many of the Japanese soldiers were coming back. They had no means of transportation. As we stopped at each station, these soldiers coming back from war during the war in the South Pacific, they got on the train. So by the time we got to Hiroshima, my sister said, from Yokohama to Hiroshima, she could not go to the bathroom. So I said, well, how did you do it? Well, she said, when the train stopped, my father would open the window, and she was 8 years old at that time. She was tiny. So he was able to carry her, and she urinated right out the window. So to give you some of the example what our family has gone through. Next page, please. This is the atomic bomb. It was dropped August 6, 1945, which evaporated 150,000 innocent people. And 5 days later, they had dropped another one. 90,000 people were evaporated at that time. I couldn't understand. Well, maybe I could understand the first one, but not the second one. How cruel that was. Okay, next page, please. This is the map of Hiroshima. I was saying the atomic bomb was dropped on, you can see the map on the lower left-hand corner. And if you could go towards that right lower corner, that's where my mother's side of the family lived, 2 miles away near the Hiroshima station. And the family was a victim, and I will mention my uncle's situation a little bit later. And we lived, well, there was a picture right above where 7 miles away in Nishihara, and also they had a picture of Gion Elementary School I attended. But anyway, that was further up north. But that's the map of Hiroshima, Japan at the time. Okay, if you go to the next page. Now, I like to recall some of my experiences in Hiroshima. Well, we had nothing. I mean, the Hiroshima had come out of the ashes. When we went back, Hiroshima was flat. It was totally destroyed. And fortunately for us, like my grandparents had a farm, not that we were able to eat everything that they grown, because this has to be shared by the rest of the country. So it was taken away from us. But we lived, and you can see how skinny I was. So that was the middle picture is summertime, and that was my clothes. And I remember summertime, we used to go to school barefooted. If you see the right side, there's a chicken coop, and that we had eggs every morning. And I was wearing an overcoat over there. And I didn't know until later that was a girl's overcoat, because I found out that we used to get care packages from my aunt in New York City, where she worked at the Harlem in a sweatshop and laundromat. And she would send these old clothes or coffee or candies and stuff like that. That's one of the old girls' clothes. I kept us warm. That was winter time. And I remember that picture over there on the corner of the left-hand side. I must have been about 4 or 5. The kids in our neighborhood would not play with me because we were foreigners, we were strangers. I mean, our sisters had a rougher time making friends. But I used to peddle marbles that my aunt used to send from New York. Real colorful marbles, while our neighborhood kids were playing with the dirty, ugly-looking brown marbles. I would kind of show those beautiful marbles so that I could play with them. Sure enough, I met friends. That was the only time they would play with me, but I was so happy when we got those care packages that I was able to get those marbles. I still remember it was one time, I don't know how in the world my aunt got hold of a cowboy hat, boots, holster, and a pistol. And my mother said, "Come here, Takeshi, put this on." Sure enough, I put it on. I just ran outside, show it to the neighborhood kids. And I was the king of the block for that particular day. And one day, I promised one kid that he was going to give me something and play with me. And I said, "Well, you could use my pistol." And so I went to my mother and I said, "Can I wear the cowboy outfit that my aunt sent?" And she would not answer me. And I said, "Where is it?" She said, "She doesn't know." And I was not able to wear that. And I remember crying all day because I had promised the kid in the neighborhood, I'll bring the cowboy outfit. You could shoot that pistol. I found out later that my mother took that cowboy outfit to city of Hiroshima in the black market and sold it. And together with like coffee and some old clothes, that our aunt used to send us care packages from United States. And I didn't know until a lot later that my mother did that. It must have been devastating for her to not to answer me. But these are some of the experiences that I remember. Next page, please.
So Mr. Furumoto, just
Yes.
for time, we still have a lot of slides left, but only about 25 minutes. So we want to make sure that the students can ask you some questions. So
Okay.
Just a warning on time. Okay, go ahead.
No, how much time do I have? 25 minutes?
I would say about 25 minutes, and then we would like to have them ask you some questions.
Question answers? Okay, I got it. Okay. This is a class that I went to 5th grade in 1955. There were 30 of us. And 2 years ago, I was invited back and 10 kids showed up and the school teacher was still arrived then. But I was able to meet. All these kids, by the way, were victim of atomic bomb. And up above, this is the first time I ever wore a suit. That was my last day in Hiroshima, Japan in May of 1956. Okay, we go to the next page. When we went back to United States, we lived in South Central, as I mentioned, and we were still away from a desirable neighborhood. And I didn't know, but when I just I thought what the United States had blondies and blue eyes, but to my shock, I saw Black kids and Hispanic and several Asian Americans in the class. But this was my class. But I want to tell a story about Blacks. When I was in the military, war in Vietnam, these Black soldiers helped me through because I was an officer and some of the Caucasians gave me a rough time. But anyway, next page. Temporarily, this was 1959, I joined the Boy Scout. We came to help my aunt, who used to send us all those care packages. And we went to help her for 3 months. She started Aki Restaurant, which was near Columbia University. And I joined the Boy Scout and I went to school in New York City. And later on, I took a refugee here when I had PTSD. And I didn't realize at the time, but this was New York City was where I was able to join the American group. Next page, please. This is the college I attended. My sisters graduated from USC, then went to City College for 2 years. At that time, they paid $5, and USC, they got a scholarship. I went to UCLA for $80 a semester. Now, I used to work 20 hours a week and just pay for my cars, and I used to commute. I never joined the fraternities or anything, and I was not able to afford the dormitory. But this is the school I went. I graduated in the business school as major in business administration. Next page, please. And when I volunteered to serve in the military, I went to officer candidate school, an engineering officer candidate school. And I thought I was going to be commissioned as engineering officer, but President Nixon took over, and then and at that time they were pulling out of Vietnam, and our entire class was commissioned as intelligence officers. But anyway, that was the time that I met my wife. 2 months before I was commissioned, during the Christmas time, I met her at one of the parties, and I would like to talk about some of my stories. But then I went to Presidio, Monterey. It was about 320 miles from Los Angeles. I remember that I used to go back on the weekends to date with her. And later on, I had a rendezvous with her. I have rest and recreation, R&R, in Japan. Okay, next page, please. This is the picture of my graduating officer candidate school, because you could notice there's one black kid, and I was the only Asian in the classroom. Next page, please. This is about summer of 1970. Across the river, and 2 miles yonder was Cambodia. President Nixon secretly went to Cambodia without the congressional approval, and I was in the heart of the invasion. And next to me was Major Ebby, who was my superior officer. I had first one was Major Cooper. Just before the operation in Cambodia, he was ambushed. He was taken back to the United States because he was wounded in action. But this is my typical combat. And I remember, I think this is one of the reasons why I come back with PTSD. I saw a lot of action over here during that time, May of 1970. Yes, next page, please. And I was able to receive, for serving the United States, a Bronze Star. But I did come back with the PTSD and also exposed to Agent Orange. I was disabled Vietnam. Next page, please. This is time I married my wife. As I mentioned that I used to date her before I went to Vietnam. And when I came back, I had an isolation in New York, and I was by myself. But I got lonely and asked her to marry me. It took a little while, but she did say yes, and I did get married. But one thing she said, because of my PTSD attack, this is the worst decision I ever made in my life, because I think she really took a lot of harshness from me, because I was another person. The inside of my body was another person because of PTSD. But she helped me through my hard times. And next year, January 30th, we'll be married 50 years. I don't know how we did it, but we did. Next page, please. Because I couldn't hold a job, in June of 1974, we started for Motorbility. Little did I know that the Motorbility was going to be a success. This is the office was $100 a month, and that's how much you could afford. And this is how we started. But I was in the right place at the right time, and Japanese became number 2 economically, and they bought New York City. They bought all over the United States. I was able to sell some of the buildings, golf courses, and I was pinching myself every day. Says, am I dreaming? But again, I was in the right place at the right time. This came the result of me having PTSD and not keeping able to keep the job. Next page, please. And this was one of the articles, and our office showed most of the Trump Park Tower, which was the best location, was the condominium conversion, 6th Avenue and Central Park South. We saw most of it, and that's the first time I was able to get myself acquainted with Donald Trump. He was very, I was used to being bullied. He was very condescending, but I was used to about only one time he had called me. It was 1992 when he was having a financial problem. He wanted to sell his yacht. He wanted to know the telephone number of the person who bought Pebble Beach, who paid almost $1 billion for it. But I don't know. He sold that to Japan. I don't know if he sold it or not. But this was some of my stories, a success story. Next page, please. Because of all the successes for the Japanese, they bought New York City, they bought trophy buildings, they bought golf courses all over the United States in the major cities. There was a Japanese bashing. Even though, this was Japanese bashing, even the Chinese kid who was in Detroit was batted down by Caucasian gangs. There was 3 hate crimes that I had faced. The first hate crime, the worst hate crime you could imagine. That was Executive Order 9066. And this was the second Japanese bashing in Oprah Winfrey show. I used to get interviewed by New York Times a lot because Japanese were buying a lot of real estate properties. And editor asked me, by the way, there's a lot of Japanese bashing. Were you ever bashing? And the night before, I had a client, and together we're at the parking lot, and we were verbally abused. And I told a story, and that hit the New York Times nationally, and Oprah Winfrey picked it up, and I went on a show on Japanese bashing. The title of the show was called Racism in America. Okay, next page. This was 10 years ago. One time, the authority, U.S. authority, had said, thank you for serving in Vietnam. And this lifted all the bad feeling I had about America. I began to talk more about my experiences in Vietnam at that time. It's like therapy for me at that time. That was great. Next page, please. These are some of the awards I received, other awards I received from the Congress and so forth for our services in Vietnam. That was great. Next page. Of all the accolades I received, I think this was my ultimate. I received key to the city of Fort Lee 5 years ago. As I mentioned, 50 years ago, when I came back from Vietnam, Fort Lee was the first place I stayed. And Fort Lee and I were like peas, carrots and peas. I don't know if you watched the Forrest Gump show. Forrest Gump, when he was a little boy, he had a little girlfriend. And he was up in the tree and said, well, you and I are like carrots in a pea. And I felt same way. Fort Lee, they really gave me a chance. Even though I had a PTSD, this and that, they gave me a really opportunity to really flourish in my business. Okay, next page. Well, today's story is such a dark story. I thought, well, I add a little romance to it. Let me introduce you to my wife. She's in the next room, so I'll be right back.
have any questions, we've got a question from Annie and Simon. So if you want to ask, obviously, I mean, there was a lot going on in Vietnam. If you want to ask something about his experience there, what the PTSD or Agent Orange, what the effects were there. Any questions about, family with Hiroshima, please just type it into the text and we'll ask Mr. and Mrs. Furumoto at the very end.
Okay. Okay, let me put. All right. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Okay.
This is the wife who said, "Tak, this is the biggest mistake I made in my life. Marry me." But I don't know. Somehow we've been married 50 years next year in a couple of months. But she really nursed me through. Without her, I'd be still, maybe I might be one of those veterans in Montana begging. But I really appreciate it. Anyway, I would like to, this was written to us by our friend. And this was the time I met her. It took about 3 or 4 JB Scotch in order to ask her to dance with me. And that was the first time I met her. And that's one of the best things that ever happened to me. I would like to read this particular poem to kind of lighten up the story a little bit. It's a very, very, very nice poem. The magic of the dance. It was a cha-cha-cha that brought 2 hearts together who met all those years ago. A shy, handsome soldier and a very pretty young lady. This is their love story, something that happened over 50 years ago. Keep the music playing. May God bless you both. Written for Tak and Carol Furumoto by Emily, August 20th, 2021. But I thought this was nice. It kind of close it up a little bit. I did have romance. I met her in Japan. I was in Vietnam. But of course, at that time when I went in summertime, it wasn't me that was inside my body. And she used to say, Tak, you really became cold. I couldn't help it. But anyway, there she is. She's part of my reason why our business was successful. But she really helped me through a very hard time. I wanted to introduce you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for coming, Caroline. So I'm going to open it up to the students.
Okay,
yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me, Shirane-san, can I have a conclusion on this?
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm doing all the talking here. Well, today's topic is about 80th year anniversary of Executive Order 9066. It is one of the darkest part of our history in the United States. And somehow there shouldn't be any other American who should face this plight of what Japanese American had gone through. And somehow we have to tell the story. And we're doing something about it. I'm challenging the Executive Order 9066. I like to go to Washington, D.C. and let them tell a story. This is what happened. If some politicians have racial prejudice, and I think it is the story that should be taught and told in the United States. And Shirane-san, I think today's talk is very, very important for the future America, for the America. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're just going to have a few minutes for some questions from students. So I'll start from one by Fernando. He's asking if you felt the apology from the U.S. government, I guess this is in the late 1980s and then the 1990s, was sincere, or do you feel like it was a PR move or something, driven from sort of politics and he's asking how you felt about the apology.
First of all, the apology was warranted. It was good. It was written. But apology letter doesn't justify what we had to face. So in that respect, I don't know if this is sincere. If it wasn't for Aiko Yoshinaga, we had discovered this fabricated information. Maybe this would be never written. Even the Supreme Court would have never had this constitution. So I think back to that question. Well, is it unsincere? Well, I think part of the reason is that this particular information was unveiled. So the truth was unveiled. So it was read. So I don't know if I was truthful or sincere. I don't know. I cannot answer that.
Okay, thank you. Annie asks whether the compensation that was given to individual Japanese Americans came with any terms or limits, and maybe if you want to elaborate on that. We had Susan Onuma last week, and she talked about how, for example, some of the Japanese American National Museum was really established by the donations given from the compensation. So of course, $20,000 is really nothing compared to the costs that you said, physically, emotionally, mentally. But do you want to elaborate or talk more about the compensation and sort of the reception and use of it?
Well, like you said, Shirane-san, how could you compensate anybody who lost 4 years of their lives? I mean, for nothing. Just being a Japanese heritage is so. I don't know. I mean, you cannot put something like this money. I cannot put it. I mean, for us, my son received education. 1/8 of the tuition was paid, but still, I was happy with that. However, really, I mean, today you have the HR 40, which is the preparation for the blacks. I mean, how could you put a price on it? So that's a question I really cannot answer. I mean, how could put value? You can't.
Okay, thank you. So Simon asks, for example, someone like your father, when you first arrived to the United States, what happened to those 16 or younger who did not have a parent or guardian? I guess Simon, you're asking about the 1920s, or this is also after 45?
That was in response to the survey, which was asking the questions about loyalty to the U.S.
I see.
Those who were 16 or who were younger than 17, you said weren't allowed to answer. So if they didn't have a parent or something, do you know how they were treated?
I cannot answer that. I'm sure they had orphan. I'm sure they had the orphan that they took care of. But there weren't that many orphans as what I hear. But I don't know how they were taken care of. I really don't. I wasn't there.
So while we're again, anybody else can type in a question. I'll ask a question. One is, you talked about the PTSD and seeing a lot of action, and then of course Agent Orange and the trials that not only you but your wife had to deal with. When was did you go through some therapy, or what was the physical, mental rehabilitation process that allowed you to sort of become more like yourself? Was the success of the realty company a big part of that? If you don't mind sharing that process of coming back a different person and how you were able to recover eventually.
Well, something like PTSD it takes time. And for me to become more normal, it took good 7, 8 years. We did not have our son until 8 years later. We didn't know whether we're going to divorce tomorrow, we're going to be separated. We've been fighting. And like I mentioned, he says, this is the worst decision marrying you in my life. It was true. I mean, I didn't feel I was really being nasty to her. I mean, it was a different person inside of me. I mean, we didn't get a therapy. Those days, they didn't have something like PTSD and this and that, but combat fatigue and this and that. I didn't know I had it. Only reason that, I mean, like I just spent time in isolation. I did get fired. I mean, I got a job. I did get fired. Well, I couldn't focus to keep a job. I mean, you get irritated. I don't know how to describe it, but that something like this, the time is very important. And also people around you. Fortunately, she was nice enough to nurse me. And, it took a lot out of her too. So, but she's a very important part of my life. I mean, I'm very, grateful that she helped me. But, well, a combination of those things, but that's a tough question, really.
Thank you. So Reen asks why you decided to keep American citizenship once you went to Japan or I guess even upon coming back.
Well, in Japan, you could declare Japanese or American citizenship when you're 18 years old. I wasn't quite that. I was 11 and a half. I came back over here. So I wasn't given that choice at that time. And then, let me get back to my sister. When she turned 18, she came back. And she was able to, 21 actually. She was able to recall her parents back. She was 18, 19. She had to work. But when she turned 21, she was able to recall her parents back. My father had no intention of coming back, of staying in Japan. He was able to realize his American dream. He was focused on trying to bring us back because he saw something good in America. It was an opportunity. And somehow, what we did, get an education, we were able to realize that.
So you mentioned something about your uncle and those who were in Hiroshima at the time. To what degree were they impacted by the bomb and the radiation, or, how was it for the family and relatives that you had who experienced and were there during World War II?
Well, my uncle was 12 years old when atomic bomb hit. And I remember him very well because he's one of the relatives whose body was burnt. His face was scarred. And my mother would tell me, when you visit your uncle, don't ever mention about those scars or burns, which I never did. So they were lucky. Their family was lucky because I mentioned only 2 miles from epicenter. 2 miles, you could get evaporated too. But they had so-called a hill or mountain called Mount Hijiyama over there. So that kind of, saved their home. Like my grandparents' house in Nishihara, which was 7 miles, according to my grandfather, the entire roof was, taken off. So, so one of my families were lucky because of the mountain they had, many mountains, and one was a little bit farther away, So, but, back to my uncle about the scars. I remember when I was in elementary school, third grade to fifth, because I came here when I went sixth grade. Intercity volleyball games. We were poor those days, and what they do is maybe one team will take their shirt off, and other team will, keep it on. But as you get closer, I mean, intercity, I mean, you could different schools, intercity. As you get closer to Hiroshima City, you could see the scars more and more. But what I saw, and really, it didn't dawn on me that these are scars from atomic bomb. Well, we're just a little kid. You don't realize those things. Now you do. You know the history and all those things. But that was the first time I ever thought, that's something strange. But I never thought anything of it. But back to my uncle. People who had to get married, especially ladies, even though they're beautiful, but there were no takers. You know why? Because they wouldn't know what the atomic bomb would do to the next generation of kids. So they couldn't get married. So my uncle married another victim, which you call Hibakusha, the victim of atomic bomb. They married each other. But it must have been pretty tough.
Okay, thank you very much. So Quinn asks about, having spent time both in Japan and America and sort of your identity of Japanese or American. And I guess related to that is, you were speaking Japanese, especially in third to fifth grade, but how did you keep up your Japanese to be good enough to deal with real estate or a businessman coming to New Jersey? Because, for example, Susan Onuma, myself, even if we had parents who spoke Japanese, we really had to study hard in college to get to a certain level. So, how did you maintain the language? And then how did that, I guess, relate to your identity of being Japanese or American?
Well, since I was about a year and 4 months old when I went to Japan, my first language was Japanese. So I spoke that until I was 11 and a half, until I came to this country. So that was my language. Second, that when we came back to this country, my parents had sent me to weekend school to keep up with the Japanese. But weekend school at that time, or even now perhaps, was like socializing. You never did you do your homework or anything. But that didn't continue too long. But anyway, my Japanese, I spoke to my parents in Japanese because my mother wasn't very good, even though she was born in this country. Her her English wasn't good at all. My father. So I talked to them in Hiroshima dialect. So I had the Hiroshima dialect intact. And back to your question, how did I talk to some of my clients, people from Japan, when they came to buy buildings, golf courses? They did renting and buying, houses and stuff like that. Well, I used initially, I still have friends who used to work at Toyota. Toyota was one of my companies that they were located in Lyndhurst, and there was a secretary, her name is Marco. I said, Utak, you used to, speak Japanese. Awful. I would mix English and Hiroshima dialect, this and that. They really made a face at it. But, I had to make a living, and I really had to learn. And when you learn that language, when you're small, somehow it just it's there. And as we went, in 2 years, my company will celebrate 50 years of Motorbility. So over the years, I have to keep on speaking Japanese, even though my Hiroshima dialect went away gradually, but still, so my standard Japanese came back, and little by little, mixing English half the time, well, it didn't stop completely. I still do. But so these things I did. And at that time, when I started the business, people from Japan were not able to come into this country without being able to get a recommendation letter, just like a Chinese, I think. And so I didn't have competition, even though my Japanese was halting and awful. The people from Japan, they needed us. They need somebody who find their homes and help them get settled. So in that respect, I was lucky, and then I did learn. My Japanese today is pretty good, but writing and reading is not to the standard. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So last question. So Randy was asking whether the VA, the Veterans Association, has been of any help having served in the Vietnam War. So as you said, there wasn't PTSD or therapy and all the stuff that we have now, but in the 1970s or 80s, did you have any relationship with the Veterans Association?
I did not, because I really counted on like people around me. I mean, I never went to, and like I mentioned, until about 10 years ago, when the authority, which was the state of New Jersey, said, "Well, thank you, Lieutenant Furumoto, for serving our country," and that lifted all the heavy weight I had been serving in, Vietnam, or serving in this country, giving your life, giving your, so, to me, all these things, help. But, VA, I didn't know I'm eligible to get some compensation for Agent Orange until 1990s, until somebody told me about it. So they keep a lot of things hush hush. And so you have to kind of be alert and trying to get compensation if you want to. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that has to be remedied in VA. But still, I got my medication, which cost thousands of dollars. And I had 2 heart surgeries and stuff like that. But, it costs a lot of money, but VA does help. Yeah, no question about it. I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Furumoto, thank you so much on behalf of me and the students. Thanks for taking your time and really sharing your story. I learned so much, and I'm sure the students learned so much today. So thank you once again for coming, and we hope you can join us again in a future class to please share your experience again.
Well, Shirane-san, thank you very much for giving me opportunity to talk. Nowadays, it's a therapy talking to your student, and also it's a joy and propagating what we went through, and never to let this happen again. So that was great. Thanks very much. Appreciate that.
Yes. Okay. Well, thanks again, and again, all the students are thanking you in the chat. So really, I think your story meant a lot. So okay, take care. Bye bye.
Okay, thank you.